For nearly 50 years, there was a system that quietly governed everyday life in the West. It wasn't written into law books, it wasn't announced in press conferences, and it was never voted on. Yet it shaped how people worked, saved, bought homes, raised families, and imagined their future. If you were born between the late 1940s and the early 1970s, this system worked almost perfectly. You finished school, you found a job, your wages rose every few years, you bought a home, you built savings, and slowly, almost invisibly, life moved forward. This wasn't luck, it was a post-war economic machine designed to reward stability, loyalty, and time. But today, that same system is failing an entire generation in real time. Millennials did everything they were told to do. They went to school, they took on debt, they worked harder, longer hours, they adapted to technology faster than any generation before them. And yet, for the first time in modern Western history, a generation is staring at a future that looks financially worse than their parents. Not because they are lazy, not because they made bad choices, but because the system they inherited was never rebuilt for them. To understand why, we have to go back to a moment when the system actually worked. After World War II, the United States and much of the Western world emerged economically dominant. Factories were intact. Competitors were devastated. Global demand flowed toward American and Western production. This created something rare in economic history: sustained wage growth tied directly to productivity. From the 1950s through the early 1970s, as workers produced more, they were paid more. A single income could support a family. College was affordable. Housing was cheap relative to wages. Healthcare costs were manageable. Retirement felt guaranteed. The system rewarded patience. Stay at a company long enough, and you were rewarded with promotions, pensions, and security. This was the era that built the middle class. But systems are not permanent. They are fragile. And in the 1970s, the cracks began to form. Oil shocks, inflation, global competition, and slowing growth put pressure on governments and corporations. Instead of rebuilding the system for a new reality, leaders made a choice. They shifted the system's priorities, from workers to shareholders, from stability to efficiency, from long-term security to short-term profit. This shift was subtle at first. Companies stopped guaranteeing pensions and replaced them with individual retirement accounts. Wages stopped rising with productivity. Job loyalty was no longer rewarded, flexibility was. Risk was quietly transferred from institutions to individuals. Boomers were already inside the system when these changes happened. They had homes, they had savings, they had careers already climbing upward. Millennials entered after the transformation was complete, and the rules were no longer the same. The first promise that broke was wages. Adjusted for inflation, real wages for the majority of workers have barely moved in decades. Productivity soared, corporate profits exploded, executive pay skyrocketed. But paychecks stayed almost frozen. For millennials, this created a permanent mismatch. They were expected to live modern lives on outdated income structures. The second promise that collapsed was housing. For decades, buying a home was the cornerstone of financial stability. Homes were affordable because wages supported them. But as wages stagnated and housing became a financial asset instead of shelter, prices disconnected from reality. Homes turned into investments, then into speculation, then into wealth storage for the already wealthy. Millennials didn't miss the housing ladder. The ladder was pulled up. In many cities, rents now consume half or more of take-home pay. Saving for a down payment became mathematically impossible. Home ownership shifted from expectation to fantasy. The third promise that shattered was education. College was once a pathway upward. Affordable tuition, strong job prospects, and long-term wage growth made higher education a rational investment. But as public funding declined, costs were shifted onto students. Tuition exploded, student debt ballooned, degrees lost their wage premium. Millennials were told education was the key. Instead, it became an anchor. A generation began adult life not with opportunity, but with obligation. And unlike past generations, they couldn't outgrow it. Debt followed them into their 30s, then their 40s. The fourth promise was stability. Boomers built careers in a world of long-term employment. Millennials inherited a gig economy, short-term contracts, at-will employment, no pensions, limited benefits. Flexibility was sold as freedom. In reality, it meant instability. You were always replaceable, always negotiating, always one downturn away from collapse. The safety nets that once protected workers were quietly dismantled. Healthcare became tied to employment. Retirement became self-managed. Housing became speculative. Every risk was individualized. And then came the financial crises. The dot-com crash, the 2008 financial collapse, the pandemic recession. Each one hit millennials at critical moments, graduating into recessions, losing early career momentum, watching wealth evaporate before it could even form. Boomers recovered because they already owned assets. Millennials didn't have any. The system punished those who arrived late. By the time millennials reached their prime working years, the cost of survival had fundamentally changed. Healthcare costs soared. Childcare became unaffordable. Transportation costs rose. Insurance costs climbed. But incomes did not. The math stopped working. This is the core failure. The system still expects millennials to live like their parents did, but it no longer pays them like it paid their parents. It still demands productivity, loyalty, and compliance. But it no longer offers security in return. This isn't a generational flaw, it's a structural one, and it's accelerating, because now millennials are no longer young. They are becoming the largest working age generation. They are raising children. They are supporting aging parents. They are expected to carry the economy forward, but they are doing it without the foundations that once made it possible. The system that worked for 50 years was built on balance. Wages rose with productivity. Housing matched incomes. Education led to opportunity. Work led to stability. That balance is gone. And in part 2, we'll explore how this imbalance is reshaping society itself. Why trust is collapsing. Why birth rates are falling. Why institutions are losing legitimacy. And why this system, if left unchanged, may not survive another generation. When a system stops working, it doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes, slowly, quietly, invisibly. At first, people blame themselves. They assumed they didn't work hard enough. They chose the wrong career. They moved to the wrong city. They fell behind. But when millions of people across different countries reach the same breaking point at the same time, it stops being personal. It becomes systemic. The first sign of systemic failure is loss of trust. Millennials were raised to believe in institutions, that if you followed the rules, the system would reward you. Work hard, get educated, be responsible, plan for the future, but trust only survives when promises are kept. And over time, every major institution broke its promise. Governments promised stability, but delivered volatility. Corporations promised opportunity, but delivered precarity. Education promised mobility, but delivered debt. Housing promised security, but delivered speculation. Healthcare promised care, but delivered cost. The result wasn't anger at first, it was disengagement. Millennials stopped believing the system was designed for them. And when belief disappears, behavior changes. One of the most visible changes is family formation. Across the Western world, birth rates are collapsing. This is often framed as a cultural choice. But it's not culture, it's economics. Starting a family requires predictability, stable income, affordable housing, accessible healthcare, time. The system removed all four. Millennials aren't rejecting families, they're being priced out of them. When survival consumes most of your income and energy, long-term planning becomes impossible. Children become a financial risk instead of a natural step. Marriage becomes a liability. Home ownership becomes irrelevant. The system didn't just fail financially, it rewired life itself. The second major consequence is political instability. When economic systems stop delivering upward mobility, politics fills the vacuum. Populism rises, polarization intensifies, extremes gain traction. This isn't ideological, it's psychological. People who feel excluded stop trusting moderation. They stop trusting experts. They stop trusting anyone who benefits from the existing order. Millennials grew up watching bailouts for banks, but austerity for workers. They saw trillions created for financial markets, while wages stayed flat. They watched asset owners get rescued while renters absorbed inflation. This created a sense that the system was rigged, not broken, rigged. And once people believe a system is rigged, they no longer seek to preserve it, they seek to disrupt it. The third consequence is the collapse of long-term thinking. The old system rewarded patience. Save now, invest slowly, build over decades. But when the future feels unstable, patience becomes irrational. Millennials live in a world of constant shocks. Economic shocks, health shocks, technological shocks, climate shocks. Planning 30 years ahead feels disconnected from reality. Retirement feels abstract. Stability feels temporary. This is why speculative behavior increases. Risk-taking isn't recklessness, it's adaptation. When slow paths are blocked, people look for shortcuts. This is how bubbles form. This is how trust erodes further. The system taught millennials to survive, not to build. The fourth consequence is institutional hollowing. Institutions depend on participation. They require belief. When millennials disengage, institutions weaken. Voting participation becomes inconsistent. Union membership declines. Community structures fade. Not because millennials don't care, but because the system never showed it cared about them. The social contract was broken unilaterally, and contracts broken only on one side don't survive. Now, the system is entering a dangerous phase, because millennials are no longer the youngest generation. They are becoming the core of the workforce. They are managers, they are parents, they are decision makers, and they are exhausted. They are carrying student debt while funding social security systems they may never benefit from. They are paying high rents while subsidizing housing markets they can't enter. They are funding healthcare systems they struggle to access. This is not sustainable. A system cannot survive when its largest productive group feels permanently behind. History shows what happens next. Either systems adapt, or they fracture. Adaptation would require uncomfortable changes. Rebuilding wage growth, decommodifying housing, reforming education financing, decoupling healthcare from employment, restoring risk sharing instead of risk shifting. But adaptation threatens those who benefited most from the old system, so change is resisted, delay becomes policy, and delay increases pressure. This is the paradox facing Western economies. The system that worked for 50 years created enormous wealth, but it also created entrenched interests. Those interests are incentivized to preserve a structure that no longer matches reality. Millennials are not demanding special treatment. They are demanding the same deal their parents received. A fair exchange between effort and outcome. Right now, that exchange is broken. And systems don't fail because people stop working. They fail because people stop believing. We are approaching that threshold. You can see it in declining home ownership, in falling birth rates, in rising anxiety, in political volatility, in the quiet resignation of a generation that feels locked out. The system didn't collapse overnight. It failed gradually, by refusing to update, by assuming yesterday's rules would survive tomorrow's pressures. But time is unforgiving, and demographic reality is unavoidable. Millennials will soon control the economy simply by existing. The choices will shape markets, politics, and institutions, and systems that failed them will face a reckoning. Either the system will be rebuilt to reflect modern realities, or a new system will emerge without permission. History is clear on this point. No economic order lasts forever, especially one that demands loyalty without offering security. The system that worked for 50 years is failing now. Not because millennials broke it, but because it was never rebuilt for them. And what happens next will define the next 50.